Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to the Sharlot Hall Museum, and thank you for attending our lecture this month. We are so happy to have you here, and we are so happy that we can put events on like this for you. Before we get started, I would like to thank our sponsors, Finley Toyota Prescott, Blind Brothers Arizona The Originals, and Pinion Painting for sponsoring our signature events, including today's lecture. I'd also like to note the Sharlot Hall Museum is a 501c3 organization, and we can always use your support through donations and museum memberships. They make events such as this one possible. Before we begin, I just want to go over a couple logistical things. I'd like to remind everyone when you exit after the conclusion of today's lecture to go through Flower Alley, which is just to the right of the auditorium here. Restrooms can be found just outside these front doors to the right down the hall. And in case of an emergency, there are 2 emergency exits. You can exit through these double doors right here in the back of the auditorium. We also have a side door right here that you can exit through as well. I'd also like to ask everyone to please silence or turn off all cellular devices for this presentation. We will also be recording this lecture, and we will be putting it on the museum's YouTube page, so if you'd like to watch it again, we will have it up there in just a few days' time. Today, we will have a special treat as local history buff Brenda Cusick brings another Prescott pioneer to life. Brenda is on the board of directors of the Western Heritage Foundation. Previously, she has brought another pioneer to our stage. That was the artist Kate T. Corey, who lived with the Hopi for 8 years, was a famous painter, and helped Sharlot Hall establish what is now known as the Museum of Indigenous Peoples. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce Grace M. Sparks, who started as the secretary of Prescott's original Chamber of Commerce way back in 1911. She was a very young woman right out of business college. Sparks' dedication, vision, and tenacity have left an incredible mark on the history of Prescott and the great state of Arizona. Grace M. Sparks is not just a name in our past. She was a force of nature, a tireless advocate for community development, historic preservation, and the growth of Arizona's parks and tourism. She served for over 30 years in the roles at both the Chamber and our rodeo. For decades, she championed civic projects that transformed our region, playing a pivotal role in establishing landmarks that continue to shape our landscape today. Whether rallying support for the preservation of Native American sites or fostering initiatives that brought economic vitality to Prescott, her legacy is woven into the very fabric of this community. A true trailblazer, she exemplified leadership at a time when women's voices in public affairs were rare. But she blossomed during the Roaring 20s and then helped lead the local economy through the lean years of the Great Depression. Her accomplishments are so many, it's impossible to name all of them in one presentation. But it's also important to know that Grace was so well connected to both state and federal politicians that Arizona has interstate highways and bridges like the 10, 79, 89, and the 60 because of her influence during the early automobile days. It's no coincidence that the 89 literally goes right through downtown Prescott. We know it as Whiskey Row. This afternoon, we have the privilege of celebrating her contributions and honoring the remarkable legacy she left behind. So please join me in welcoming the unforgettable, the unstoppable, and the truly inspiring Grace M. Sparks.
Thank you. Hello. I know, right? Flapper, rebel, more like unconventional. You know, I came to work in Prescott, as the young lady said, right when they started the Chamber of Commerce. I had just finished going to business school down in Phoenix, and then moved back up here and was appointed as the first secretary. Now, I don't mean secretary like, that kind. I mean like Secretary of State, that kind of secretary. In fact, I served under 16 mayors during my 35 plus or minus years running the Chambers of Commerce here in Prescott. Back in that era, I can't believe I can still fit into this outfit, right? Young ladies, we thought we could take on the world. We were very different than our Edwardian and Victorian mothers. We wore makeup, we bobbed our hair, and we wore short skirts. We had a good time, and we were told we could have careers. So that's what I did. Now, if you'll bear with me, even though I was a different kind of secretary, I was also very organized. And I kept lots and lots of notes. So if you wouldn't mind, go down memory lane with me. And I'm going to tell you a couple of my favorite stories from my favorite city, Prescott. As the secretary over all those decades, I wore many hats. Today I'm going to tell you one about wearing this one. So imagine this, we're in the Chamber of Commerce's a conference room, and I have to convince Mayor Goldwater that we need a new hotel. So I am very frustrated because when I look back in my notes, I realize I've been telling him this since 1919, and here it is, Christmas 1924. But you know what happened about a year ago? The Congress Hotel right across from the Elks, it burned down. Now I have 50 less rooms to try and get tourists here to Prescott. So I have to get him to get that funding for me. We have been looking for developers, and nobody will build this building, this grand hotel that I need. And I need way more than 50 rooms. This is my main job, right? To bring tourists here and to get new commerce in Prescott. Oh, I think the mayor's coming now. I have coffee ready for him because it is snowing outside. So, mayor comes in, he's got snow on his shoulders, and he says, "Hi, Grace, hurry up. Sarah wants me to get a goose for Christmas." Okay. Look, Mayor, we've been talking about I need a new hotel. Oh, Grace, you're not going to talk about that again, are you? Yes, I am. I need to put on my banker's hat because somebody's got to get us the funding. We have not been able to find a developer. And he says, well, I'm sure you'll think of something. You always think outside the box, Grace. So he says, just make it happen and we'll talk about it next year. Another year. He hustles out whistling jingle bells. Well, I think about it. I know people. I've been in this job now for over 10 years. I know people who know people, and some of them, well, they're not bankers, but they're financiers. I am going to have to think outside the box. By spring, guess what I had done? Working with several businessmen in town and even in Phoenix, we put together stock options. The city was going to build this, and by the city, I don't mean the government, I mean us, the people. I made these stocks $1 each, and we just needed 400 people that would buy several stocks each, and I was one of the first. Well, we only got so far, and by June, we still needed to sell a lot more. I talked to my friends in the Kiwanis Club, and they sold all kinds of stocks. We had a special day down on the courthouse, and they raised over $150,000. By that time, I was able to go talk to a banker, and we got the loan for the rest of it. So by 1927, we had a beautiful hotel right across from the Elks. And it was much bigger than the Congress. It went all the way down the hall or the hill there. Has anybody been in the Hassayampa? Yes, that lobby. Oh, I wanted a beautiful lobby with a fireplace. And I wanted to make sure that that hallway that went down had beautiful craftsmen in my favorite colors. Peacock colors, some green, some blue. Anybody ever seen that in the hallway there? Well, I take credit for it, but it wasn't all me. By 1927, we had that hotel done, and we had several kind of grand openings because it opened slowly, each part of it. And it had things like a portico for automobiles, because I was sure we were going to have more and more cars coming here to Prescott. But now, let's back up to 1920. Because there's another hat that I wore here in Prescott, and it was probably my favorite hat. Any guesses why I had to wear this one?
Rodeo.
Yes, well, we didn't call it the rodeo yet. We didn't start calling it rodeo until after 1925. You know what they called it then was cowboy contests, and we did it at the fairgrounds. The fairgrounds also were the racetrack. We did lots of things out there. And one of my favorite things about when I wore that cowboy hat was they called me Babe. Babe was my nickname because I was the youngest of the children in my family. But they also called me the girl who bosses 200 bronco busters. That was probably my favorite title in this job. But this particular day, come with me. We're going to the fairgrounds. It's August. We've had the pioneer or frontier days. And guess what? We're in the red. It's 1920, and we are not making enough money. We're not getting enough people coming up to go and see the cowboy contest. And it's going to be a problem if we keep going down this road. The boys are coming in, and we don't really have any buildings here at the fairground. So yeah, there's a barn and some stables, but nothing like it is today. We built most of those buildings in the Great Depression. We'll talk about that later on. But this is still 1920, and it's hot in this barn, and the monsoons are coming, and the boys are kind of rowdy. I can see they've already been drinking some beer, and I suspect there might be a little bit of whiskey out there too. I'm trying to settle the boys and seriously discuss the budget problem we're having. And they're telling me, oh, don't bring us bad news, babe. We don't like that. We know that you're going to figure this out. You're the boss. That's what we call you. One of the boys in the back says, yeah, babe, why don't you get married with me? And I'm like, no, boys, I got enough jobs without getting a husband. So they keep drinking their beer, and I walk out thinking, I have got to come up with some way. We've been running this rodeo since, I keep saying rodeo, but we've been running this thing since, anybody know what year? 1888. Yeah, that's right, 1888. And people aren't coming up from Phoenix like they used to. And we need to not only bring them up on the trains from Phoenix, we need to bring them from Flagstaff and maybe Los Angeles, but how are they going to cross the Colorado? I don't know, we'll figure that one out later. So I figure the boys aren't helping me too much. I'm going to go talk to the women. I got a good friend named Sharlot Hall. You all know her. And I got another good friend, Kate. And all the girls at the Monday Club. I bet we can come up with some ideas. Well, you probably know the story from the 1920s. We put together the Way Out West show. It was kind of a varietal show, almost like a minstrel show. We had clowns, and we got a couple automobiles to come. And Kate said we should probably do maybe the Hopi Indian dance. So we consider that. Well, we try all kinds of things. We do all kinds of mailings and marketing. And sure enough, everybody comes up for this thing. And it knocks people's socks off. But you know what their favorite part of it was?
The Hopi dance.
It was the Hopi rattlesnake dance. So the only thing that we got criticized for was, well, the men who did the Hopi dance, they wouldn't use real rattlesnakes. And I promised them, well, we'll order you some rubber snakes and you can do the dance with those. Well, they didn't make it here in time. So we sent some young boys out into the forest and they got us some gopher snakes and some bull snakes. And well, the men danced with those. And they loved it. We almost got out of the rut. Not quite. So we got together, this time men and women, and we decided we're going to do the Way Out West show again for the next year. But we're going to cut out some of the stuff people didn't like. They didn't like the clowns too much. But as you said, they loved the Hopi dance. So we did it again, got lots and lots of people at that rodeo. Again, not calling it rodeo, at Frontier Days. And we went into the black. We were able to get everything nice and organized with the budget and back on track. And me, as the person in charge of getting tourists here, started thinking, I bet we could do a whole different show that was just about Indian dances. Now you have to understand at this time the federal government wasn't letting the Indians dance. Do you remember that? It was against the law because they thought they were doing pagan things. But we were white people and we could do those things. So we separated out the rodeo, the 4th of July parade, and in August we started doing Indian dances under a whole new group called the Smoke Eye. Again, that has its own long history and probably went on a little bit too long, but that's where the origins came from. And I just wanted to tell you a little bit about how we did that. In 1922, or was it 23, I went all the way to Washington, D.C., because by this time I'd been working for the Chamber of Commerce for over a dozen years, and I was pretty well connected, not only with our local government, but with our Phoenix and state government, and with the senators and Congress people who were going all the way to Washington. And you know who I met when I went back there? And I made him an honorary Smoke Eye? Calvin Coolidge, President Calvin Coolidge. I know, that's a fun thing, right? The 20s, they truly did roar, and I came to my highest power at that time. And I was at the top of my game until 1929, October 29 to be specific. You all might remember what happened then. Yeah, the stock market crashed and the Great Depression started. We didn't call it the Great Depression right off the bat because we didn't know how great it was going to be. Well, my mom always said, great problems create great opportunities, Grace, and I believed her. And one of the things that FDR was doing was handing out lots of money. You know, sometimes when you have things like pandemics, the Spanish flu, recessions, the federal government tries to jumpstart things, and he sure enough did. So we came up with a couple of short-term ways to get money from the federal government, and one of them was hire a man for a day. Back then it was most common that the men worked. I was kind of unusual having my job. And in one day, the Chamber of Commerce, the mayor, and I, we got 250 jobs in one day using FDR's money and programs. Money started coming in other ways, and I became one of the chairmen for Northern Arizona Welfare. And again, there was all kinds of money coming from these alphabet soup places back east. We got WPA money, CCC money, FERA money. I forget all the other ones, but there was all kinds of money that we could write for and get. So some of the projects we did in those early years were things like street lights. You know, the street lights downtown, and some of them on Park Avenue. That came through those projects. We put in infrastructure, sidewalks. Ever seen WPA stamped in the sidewalks here? Great Depression era. We put in fire hydrants. Some of the first fire hydrants in Arizona came through those programs. we had lots of camps here. And part of the reason was people would come up here to get out of the heat from the valley. So we hired and made lots of what were called CCC camps, Conservation Corps camps. And men would come here, stay in the camps, and build things. So if you've been lucky enough, and I know I have, to go up in the Prescott forest and you sit around some of those beautiful rock circles that have fires in them, those were built by CCC camps. We were putting men to work from all over the state, but here in Prescott. Let's see, they made camping spots, outhouses, fire pits, and then we decided to go after some really big projects. Great Depression just kept going on, and by this time I had lots of contacts. The federal government knew that we knew how to use that money well here in Prescott and all through northern Arizona. So we did other things like built the armory on Gurley. You know where they used to keep the armaments before that? Well, we won't talk about it because it was kind of dangerous and it was kind of downtown. We built the Smoke Eye Museum and all the lodges there. This is when we built the fairgrounds into rodeo grounds. We put in those stands that hold up to 5,000 people. Some beautiful buildings named after locals who are important to the rodeo. You've seen those stone buildings out there? That was all WPA money coming from the federal government. Let's see, there was cemetery fences put in. So right behind the Smoke Eye, there's a beautiful cemetery there. Those fences around there were projects from the Great Depression. The baseball fields right across the street. Well, we've been playing baseball there for years and years, but we put up those beautiful fences, some of the stands, and I got to put in my favorite. There was some 1920 Art Deco gates right at the front. I don't know if you've ever noticed, that's Art Deco there. We put in small bridges all over town so that we could cross Granite Creek better. And one of my favorites that we named after the mayor who helped me get the Hassayampa, the dam at Goldwater Lake. By this time, it was getting in the late 30s and I was pretty tired. In fact, I was kind of worn out, and I had to go to a sanitarium for a while. I missed almost a year of work by living in California and just trying to get my feet back under me. When was this depression going to get over? We tried a couple more giant projects that had been in place, and I knew that we had to get done. And those included things like Highway 89, Highway 79 over the mountain to Jerome and down into the Verde Valley. And one of my big projects, we got the bridge over the Colorado finally. Anybody ever been to Blythe? That bridge that you cross there? That was one of those projects. We got it done through the Prescott people who knew how to get things done with all those politicians back east. Before that, well, you either had to ford it on your horse or you had to take a ferry once automobiles became important. And of course you could take the trains because they had their own bridges there. But next time you go down to Blythe, there's an old bridge that lined up with Hobson, and we called it the Hobson Bridge. And that was one of the big things I worked on when I came back. A couple things here on this campus. The governor's mansion, well, the state had been dribbling out money for years so that Charlotte could take care of that thing. We got all kinds of money in the Great Depression, and I said that Charlotte was going to be my pet project and we were going to get that mansion refurbished well, my mom would be mad if I said, come heck or high water. So we got it done. And there's a building right behind it that's called, well, I think they call it something else now, but back then we called it the building that 1,000 hands built. All kinds of volunteers and people that needed jobs. We finally got Charlotte a proper building where she could put her pioneer artifacts. Is this too many stories or are we doing okay? Okay. Because, 37 years is kind of hard to smash down into 30 minutes, but I wanted to go there. This is one of my more favorite stories, but I'll just say right off the bat, it wasn't very fashionable at this time in the country to like or take care of Indians. But we had great people here in northern Arizona, and we had a really great set of people here in Prescott. And because of the terrible things that had happened during Indian wars and when we moved people off to New Mexico, we had lost the Yavapai tribe. Did you know that? They got smashed in with their enemies, the Apache. There was no Yavapai tribe federally recognized, and Charlotte brought this to my attention, and so did Kate, who was also an advocate for the Native Americans. And she said, we need to bring this back. Well, I had just applied for a bunch of money because we were going to convert Fort Whipple into the VA's hospital. And I knew that there was lots and lots of land there. So we submitted to the federal government a plan, a proposal, that the Yavapai needed to be reestablished, the Prescott Yavapai tribe, and that they deserved a reservation and homes. Well, you can imagine how popular this was back east. I did know Coolidge, who had helped do some really positive things on behalf of the Native Americans. And let's just say, long story short, anybody know if we got a tribe? Do they have a reservation?
Yes.
Have you ever heard the story of how the houses were built out there? Their chief was Sam and his wife Viola Jamulia. I'm getting goosebumps, literally, when I think about these people. They were proper, awesome, amazing people, and they were Presbyterians at the beautiful Presbyterian church on Marina. And they said, we'll use this money, like you said, Kate, we're going to build these houses. And we're going to build them for every family in our tribe first. The chief and the assistant chief, our houses will be last. And that's exactly what happened. They built all those houses under the FARA grants, except for 2. Do you know who didn't get a house out of that project? The chief and the assistant chief. We figured out other ways to make sure those houses were built. That's a proud moment for me. Let me transition now to a final story. And we talked a lot about the construction hats that I wore. This is also related to construction and probably one of the biggest Native American projects that happened up here in northern Arizona. So I'll set the setting for you, and you can see if you can guess what this is. I had to take a car, we had cars by now in the late 30s, and we went up and over the oiled road 79 that went to Jerome, and then back down the other side into Clarkdale. And you could see the winding, moving Verde River as it went through the marshes down there. We stopped in front of this big hill that just looked like it was a pile of boulders and rubbles. Had all kinds of agave growing out of it and other desert plants, that we have around here. And I looked at that pile, kicked a couple of pottery sherds at the bottom of it, and started asking around, because we had been told for years and years and years that there was a pueblo under that. That wasn't a regular old hill. This was where the Native Americans' ancestors lived. So I wrote one of the biggest grants I wrote during that period, and I got turned down at first. And then one of my letters, I said, sometimes the best man for the job is a woman. We rewrote that grant a couple of different ways, and sure enough, got the money. And it has, in a very unconventional way. I did say it was kind of unconventional, right? They were giving out lots of money for people who still didn't have jobs and were not white men. They had produced a lot of jobs for the men, but there were women who needed jobs, there were elderly people who needed jobs, there were Indians, Mexicans, even youth. So I had to really think inside the box this time. I worked with a couple of men in Clarkdale, and we obtained access to a very large warehouse. And then we got the money for the white guys, basically, and for men who were strong and could move all those boulders off of that pueblo, because sure enough, there was a pueblo underneath there. And what that warehouse was for was that pottery shirt. Do you know how many thousands and thousands of pottery sherds we found in that hill? And we found manos and metates and jewelry and unfortunately graves, lots of graves of babies because they would bury them in their house in the pueblo. So we literally moved mountains, rebuilt that pueblo, built a beautiful museum, and in that big box that I thought inside of, that's where we hired the elderly people, and the Mexicans, and the Indians, and the children, and they put those jigsaw puzzles together. We put together hundreds and hundreds of pottery, pots full olas, amazing little pots that look like animals. You can see many of them in the museum that's over there in Clarkdale. We built a museum to show them off, reconstructed that pueblo, and at the very end of it, I was standing at the top of this place with one of my friends. He was an Apache man. He had helped lead the workers inside that warehouse. And he said a word that I'd never heard before. And I was like, can you say that again? What are you talking about? Tusikut. What's this word, Tusikut? He says, that you see it, Grace. That river that wanders. This Tusikut. Anybody been there? If you haven't, I highly recommend you go see it. Beautiful place. And you can see the river for miles and miles and miles there. So yes, my career was filled with many hats, and my career basically became my life. Prescott was my baby. I was once asked, as I said, by a cowboy, how come I didn't get married? And I said, I really didn't need another job, so I enjoyed my life. And yes, when I was young, I was a flapper. I learned how to play the cornet because jazz was all the thing. But I don't think I was ever a rebel. I do think I was unconventional. Thank you for having me here today.